Hey guys, F1 Fanatic here to give you the first installment in the F1 Championship Edition time trial series. We're going to take the run all around Imola, see how that works out. It's a track that hasn't been on the F1 calendar since probably 2006, so about 8 years since it's been on the calendar, so it'll be a bit of a retro. Go back, I guess. But anyway, let's talk about the driving style that I have in F1 Championship Edition. Well, as I do in all my Formula 1 games, I always use the manual gearbox. It's a little different in Championship Edition now, because in 2013, I believe it's the X button is to go up a gear, square is to go down. But in this, I think it's X up and triangle down, so it's a little different, but I get used to it. But yes, I use the manual gearbox as I do in all my Formula 1 games that I play. The brake bias, as usual, goes back down to the rear. I have it set to 1, which is the rear bias, essentially. So, not maximum oversteer, I wouldn't say, but significant amount of oversteer. So I can have that comfortability level as I do in 2013. Like I said in I think it was the first time trial series, or in the first video on 2013's time trial series, I don't like to have that limitation with the steering power. That's not my kind of thing, and I don't do well with limitations. So, yep, and then for the traction control, I have to turn up to 3, which is the maximum setting for traction control. Just to be assured that, I'm not going to be spinning all over the track. And one thing I noticed, too, is the handling profile, as I call it, but basically the core standards of the handling are, as many people who play Championship Edition, as many of you who play Championship Edition know, it's significantly different as compared to F1 2013. So, there's some, the steering power isn't as strong as 2013. You don't have to make as much of an effort to steer, I guess. But when you're at high speeds, it gets worse, I guess. It's kind of a confusing nature, but it's a little more intense as compared to 2013. So, basically, it's very different, and as you can see right there, I try to avoid curbs, because mainly that happens in 2013, in Championship Edition, which basically, it's a big glitch that should have been fixed, but obviously it hasn't been, so it's frustrating, but I try to avoid the curbs as much as possible. But, yeah, but moving on, I technically, or most of the time, when I see, or in Championship Edition, there's a ghost that goes around, which sometimes is also frustrating, because I tend to not do very well with ghosts, like ghost laps, where it shows the ghost in front of you, or behind you, or wherever you are in the lap. Sometimes I don't like that, because it just pushes me harder and harder and harder, to a point where I could be making several screw-ups on every lap, and it just makes my lap worse. Therefore, I don't really necessarily like ghosts, but sometimes it can be to my benefit, too. So sometimes, if I see the ghost in front of me, it just makes me that much more inclined to push harder and try to get ahead of the ghost. Which, basically, further increases my pace, and therefore creates that essential sporadic kind of pace as I do in 2013. But, yep, as I said before, I try to avoid curbs, so, mistakes don't occur like you saw in the last lap. But basically, yeah, and even one thing you will notice when I play Championship Edition, I brake even later than I do in 2013. You may think that I brake late in 2013, but it's even later in Championship Edition. And I noticed that you can get away with that a lot, where you could brake a lot later than usual, which I find kind of odd. And, the driving line, as I said in 2013, the driving line that I use is set to corners only, but in Championship Edition, you can't set that to corners only. You have to either have it on or have it off. And like I said in there, I like to have it for, basically as a guideline in case, stuff gets intense, I can have that guideline as a kind of a last resort, something to go to kind of remind me where I am on the track, where I need to accelerate, where I need to brake. It's like that reminder. But when it comes to the racing line, the one thing that just completely it's just a mind boggler is when it tells you to brake, you can actually brake almost a full second later than where it's telling you to brake. And sometimes that just boggles me. Mind boggles me even. Because where it tells you to brake, you can get more out of it, you know? So you'll notice in Championship Edition, I brake even later than I do in 2013 to get that maximum performance and to ultimately get the faster lap, to get the fastest lap. But basically, yeah. And another thing you'll notice too is when it comes to gears, you do kind of notice in 2013 too, but to put it into a broader term, I'm basically on my toes when it comes to gear changing. Like, with me, you'll see very fast gear changes up and down. So, mainly I'm on my toes when it comes to that, to keep myself straight on the track. You know, and sometimes I proceed with caution, but most of the time, you know, I'm thinking about the lap, getting the fastest lap. Because obviously, with the fastest lap, you're going to make progress within a race. So it's going to make it easier for you to proceed further. But, I mean, that pretty much handles it, essentially. I mean, it's not really any different than 2013. I mean, even with racing games, like Formula 1 games in general, it's very similar. Even you can even go back to like 2011 and 2012, and my handling is very, I guess you could say hardcore maybe, but mainly it's very little caution. You know, I tend to test the car a lot, and that's basically what I put into it. But I got no more points to bring up. But in the next video, as I did in the time trial series for 2013, the next video will talk about the times that I clock and my pace and how I do pace-wise in F1 Championship Edition as compared to F1 2013. But later on in this lap, I'll end up making a huge epic fail and end up just rage quitting. But yeah, so basically, yeah. But this is F1 Fanatics signing out for YouTubers out there and so forth. But see you in the next video. Goodbye.